Welcome back, everybody. I am so glad that you're joining me today. I am very excited for you to hear from our guest today. Lydia Callahan is a very well experienced teacher. She is highly educated. She has so much experience in specifically teaching reading, and she has now come up with a product in a company called Reading HQ that is there to help families like yours teach their children to read with ease, to really understand how, and to help you overcome some of the insecurities that we all have about tackling this very big thing. So, Lydia, welcome to the podcast today. I'm so glad you're here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. There are a few things that I enjoy talking about more in this world than kiddos and helping kiddos learn to read. So thanks for having me on.
Well, I love that, and it's such a big deal because when I talk to moms, particularly moms who are thinking about homeschooling, they're kind of toying with the idea. This idea of teaching kids to read is almost overwhelming. Like it is, and I remember I was scared to death, even though I had seen. By the time we started homeschooling, two of my kids had already been through first grade, so they had a good foundation for reading. But thinking about my other two coming up, I was scared to death. And so I want today to really talk about the fear that a lot of families face regarding this because we know how important it is to teach our kids to read. But then also, we're going to go through some of the mechanics of it. And I want you just to tell us exactly how we can approach it, how it works, and why, as a mom, I think it's very doable to teach your kids to read. That's kind of what I'm excited to talk to you about today.
Oh, I love that. I think that you're right on when you talk about people who have a sense of apprehension surrounding the learning to read process and I think in some ways that's a very good thing because it says two things. First of all, that you care very deeply whether or
Mm,
not your child is successful, and you understand the enormity of the task of educating your child. Those
yeah,
two things, it's important for them to be taught, to learn well, and then when it's on your shoulders, it means you're taking it seriously. It's not just a lazy thing to you. It's not just a
right.
we'll fix it, it'll work out. That kind of carelessness is always a red flag to me. But someone who cares very deeply does approach the subject with seriousness. And so
Mm,
to me, I wouldn't take that as a sign that, oh, I shouldn't do this, but as a sign that you're on the right track. You are you are taking your child's education and their future seriously, and you want to do everything that you can. And if you're coming at it from a place of, I don't know what to do, well, then you're open to the answers. You're open
yeah.
to learning. And I think as a teacher, one of the one of the lifelong characteristics that a teacher should have is that I am also a lifelong learner. I never know all the answers. And so that process of learning to read and learning to teach children to learn to read is a
Mm,
lifelong one. So I think if you are feeling apprehension at the thought, let that emotion and that feeling be a motivator that you're on the right track and that you have a lot of tools at your disposal, and it's just a process of diving into those tools and figuring out which one of them is right for you and for your kiddo.
yeah, and I love the way that you position that because I I know for certain that that is not the way that most of our minds think. We don't see this as a positive, as an understanding of the importance and taking our role seriously. We see it rather as a weakness. And the way that you expressed that, I thought was so hopeful and so empowering that I'm very excited to hear kind of how you start working this out for us. Now, I think that I know you spent a long time. Was it like 15, 16 years that you taught in a classroom? So how does your classroom experience kind of overflow into what you're doing now as far as helping parents teach their kids to read?
Well, so my career is sort of one that has taken a lot of detours. I First of all, I have always wanted to be a teacher. It has only that has I marched out of kindergarten and I was like, "Ha ha, I know what I'm doing the rest of my life."
This was
And
fun. Let's do it
right?
more.
I would like to do this every day. Thank you. I knew from very early on that I wanted to be a teacher, and I went to school and I got a degree in teaching, and I went into the classroom, spent a lot of years in a classroom, and then I said I need to be better at this. I need to find out more because harkening back to the same question that you just asked me about moms, I felt that in trepidation as a teacher because
Hmm.
um, in the same sense that homeschooling provides you with the opportunity and the strength to work one-on-one and to create this program and use of tools that is completely centered on one person and their needs and their individuals, that's a strength of homeschooling. One of the strengths of the classroom is that you work with a lot of kids who are at the same age, the
Hmm.
same development, and yet they have different achievement results. And so it is a puzzle to look at that. You're looking at the same process from sort of a different perspective, and you're trying to find out, well, why did that work for this kiddo and didn't work for this kiddo? And we're working on
Hmm.
the same things. We're all doing the same thing at the same time, and we're getting very different results. So I would start pulling kids in after class, and I'd work with them after school, and some kids would just take off and they just needed a little extra support, a little extra practice, attention on certain specific skills, and then boom, they're off. And then some, it just didn't seem to land in the same way.
Hmm.
And we would do some of the same things and we do more of it. And what I realized is that for some kids, more is just more. It's not
Right.
answering the questions that they have. And so you need to ask different questions to get through. When I realized that, I said, I need more insight. I don't know what to do beyond these things, just doing them more
Hmm.
often or more at a time. How do you really dig into that process to find out what's going to work for a broad spectrum of kids? And so I went to grad school and I spent two different grad school careers studying elementary education and the art of teaching, and then
Hmm.
specifically the process of reading and breaking that down
Wow.
into its different components. So I think that because of that, I have a lot more insight into the
Hmm.
process of reading than maybe most average teachers, and yet the more you find out and the more you learn, the more you realize, well, you can never know it all,
Uh,
but here are the things.
there's more to
There's
discover.
always more to learn
Yeah.
because each child is different and learns differently. And I think that that harkens back to, as believers, acknowledging the majesty and glory of God's creation
Hmm.
reflected in us, because
Yeah.
each child is going to learn differently based on the fact that God made them differently, with different strengths and different weaknesses and different ways of looking at things and thinking through things. And so there's no one single answer, but there are lots of different ways to accomplish that one result. Because if
Hmm.
you sort of skipping down the road 10 years for any child, they're going to learn to read. There
Yeah.
are very, very few people who cannot read. And so they're going to get there. And just knowing that that is going to happen helps to take a little bit of the pressure off. If your third grader isn't, or if your first grader isn't following the same path to reading that your third grader took, then that
Yeah.
is not a sign that you were doing things the wrong way. It is a sign that God made each of these two kiddos uniquely and that they are going to be on different paths. So I think my experience as a teacher has shown me the uniqueness of each learner and
Hmm.
bringing the same knowledge base to the learner, but then allowing that journey for each learner to go differently. So that's what I've learned there. And then on the side of creating this program that has been my life over the last 4 years, after the grad school, after the teaching, I because I couldn't find a teaching job graduating from this second program that I did,
Hmm.
I ended up being hired by a marketing company that wrote textbooks, and they threw me into this world of curriculum development, and I ended up being both an author and a consultant for a lot of different curriculum companies. And many of them,
Hmm.
I've worked with a lot of the curriculums that your parents are using for those companies, doing reviews and seeing does it actually
Yeah.
work. And I think it's also helpful for your moms to realize that many of the textbooks that they're using were designed to be used in a classroom with a
Absolutely.
teacher who is looking at 20 different students in a classroom and trying to meet 20 different needs. So one thing that can help to alleviate some of the pressures that moms feel as they're taking on this task of educating their children is that most teachers understand is that I don't have to do everything in this book. I have everything
Right.
in this book so that I can pick and choose what meets the needs of this class that's in front of me. Well, a lot of sometimes that's one of the best conversations to be able to have with especially a first time homeschool mom is I don't have to do everything that's in
Mm.
here. This is so that I can have options. So that helps when having that conversation, especially with homeschool moms, is knowing that these were designed for groups of people to have tons of different resources, and it is not on your shoulders to
Yeah.
do absolutely everything cover to cover.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so you mentioned before as you were talking about the uniqueness of each child, and I couldn't help but think how again how knowing that we are created in the image of God, knowing that God knew us and our children before we were formed in our mother's womb, understanding that as we do because we know what God's word says about God and humanity and his love and care for each one of us as individuals, recognizing that even in these very practical ways should give so much peace to particularly Christian homeschool moms because you understand the bigger picture of it. It's not just, something trite, oh, every kid is different, just like this little thing. No, every child is different because the good creator God designed them that way. And that is a powerful thing to remember. And I was just my spirit was rejoicing as you were talking about that because that is God has given us that and we see it in his word and it can be such a comfort to us. And yet so often we just kind of leave it laying on the ground and don't really pick it up and use it as God, kind of has it there for us.
Absolutely. I think one of the most powerful things that I've learned, I don't know, in the last decade was I had a conversation with somebody that led me to a book um, that was talking about dyslexia. Because I think
Mm.
when a lot of people they talk about the struggles of reading this, the first thing that pops into their mind is, oh, I'm
Yeah.
dyslexic, and for so long that was wrapped up in thinking that, oh, adjust your expectations down for this dyslexic student. They're going to struggle. They're not going to be able to do as much or do it as quickly or do and it's not going to look like what we're doing. And it became a very negative thing until I read in this book and realized that dyslexia is a way of thinking and processing information. And oftentimes the struggles that dyslexic people have in learning to read are far overbalanced by their
Mm.
abilities in different areas. The I read in the book the statistic that I think it was over 70% of the people that attend MIT are dyslexic. So much so that they refer
Really?
to dyslexia as the disease of MIT. And that
Wow.
and that people are beginning to recognize that an advantage to be able to
Mm.
spatially visualize the way that dyslexic thinkers have, and people are starting to list dyslexic thinking on resumes
Oh
as
my
a
goodness.
perk. They're looking for people who think that way. And that just went, oh man, our minds can
That's
become so
amazing.
small. And yet God designs certain people to think different ways that may make part of their journey, part of that early learning journey, more difficult than other people's. And
Yep.
yet the capacity that they have is far greater and far different than somebody who didn't have that early struggle. So I think it is helpful to keep that in mind, that I don't just lightly say God made each of us different, but God not only has a separate plan for each individual, but he uniquely prepares them for that. And
Mm.
so sometimes that means that what God has for them, he is going to have them see things completely differently than everyone else. So there's a lot to unpack there, but that really does help you to fully embrace whatever educational differences might be
Yeah.
present in your kiddos.
Oh, I love that. That is so exciting. And I can just imagine the moms who have children who have struggled, or who have had to work harder to overcome differences like you noted, just rejoicing to hear how God is using that and how people are beginning to understand the strengths that, as moms, we see it, we know that they have so much to offer, but there's this box that people tend to be stuck in, and to see that that box is just blowing up is awesome, and I am so glad you brought that up.
Absolutely. I mean, it really it changed a lot in my thinking because I thought how many times I'm a proponent of the student. I absolutely loved every single day in the classroom. I love it because it's never boring. You never know
Oh
what you're
no.
going to get. Every single day is different. And I think maybe my sense of humor is just perpetually 8 years old. And so every day I was like,
Yeah.
let's go. So I always had a love and a joy of being in the classroom. But sometimes you don't even realize how you mentally put someone in a box and you think, okay, I expect this particular thing from this
Yeah.
person. And I can accidentally or incidentally put limitations on this child because of what I think they're capable of. And that is helpful to remember that like don't under expect from anyone,
Yeah.
and and allow them to grow in a way that fits who they're going to be later on down the road, who the Lord has planned for them.
Yeah, so good, so good. I want to transition just a little bit here. We are right now at the beginning of a brand new, fresh school year for most
Mhm.
people,
Yes.
and so there are a lot of families listening in who are just kind of wading into this year's version of teaching reading or reinforcing reading. We're doing
Hmm.
reading with our children and helping them grow in those skills for years and years and years. I want you to talk a little bit about Reading HQ and to share some of the key principles that you included in there and why they're so important in helping our kids succeed.
All right, I'll give you a nutshell version of it, um, and it kind of speaks a little bit to the history of it. And I say history, but it's barely barely existing at this point. I I started in 2020 when COVID shut down. I was working. I was at that marketing and sales company, and when the world shut down, our company lost several contracts within that first two
Hmm.
week shutdown because companies closed and they didn't know when or if they'd be able to reopen, and some never did.
Right.
It was a really
Yeah.
unstable time, and I found myself with a lot more time on my hands because the work that had traditionally filled my workday was non-existent. And I went back to my first grade teacher heart, and I was like, all these little kiddos, because they're missing as that 2 weeks turned into the rest
Big
of the school year.
chunks. Yeah.
It was so sad to me because that's when kids take off. You know,
Mm.
their school year follows a cycle. That first quarter, you're reviewing the material that they heard last year, and then the second two quarters, you're filling them with new information and building on that knowledge base that they already have. And that last quarter of the school year, you just see them take off. They
Mm.
tend to just explode, and they gain a lot of independence, and you see them start reading more smoothly and full sentences and then paragraphs, and some of them are in mini chapter books by the time you get out of first grade. And so I was thinking about all of the growth that the kids were missing, and so I started to just create some activity packs for parents so
Mm.
that they could keep their kids in a reading mode while they were at home.
Right.
And I thought, well, this will give a little bit of revenue for the company as well. I could sell them for $15 and give people a couple of weeks of stuff to work on. Well, it grew, and what I ended up with was a program that was geared towards helping parents if their kids were behind in reading. So what I tried to do was take a year of school and say, okay, what are the main components that if you don't understand these, you won't be successful at that next year of
Yeah.
school, and then compress that down. So in the kindergarten, first and second grade level, there are 30 different lessons. Each of them have a video and a work together time, and then an independent activity or worksheet
Mm.
time. So that's that's really what it is. So there's 30 hours of instruction there. And then at the upper elementary, which I just finished that program a year ago last month. Um, that is 45 lessons of just skill work, and then a whole reader of stories there. So it's really about
Hmm.
90 days worth of content. So
Okay.
really, it's not a full curriculum. It's not designed to give you everything. It's really there for those kiddos that are learning differently, that
Yep.
are maybe not being as successful as they could be or at the pace of their peers. So this is meant to come along and say, okay, here we are. It's from a slightly different perspective. It's not going to look just like the the traditional model, and maybe that'll shake up and help you think about things differently. So
Wow.
that's what Reading HQ is.
That's fantastic. And it's such a great, I just want to make sure that all of the moms out there who are struggling, like their kid is legitimately struggling with this, that they find out about it because um, it's so important. There's, you know, when a child struggles to read it, and it's in a homeschool context anyway, is all that's my context, so that's what I'll speak about. But you see, the mom is impacted by it because the mom's care, I didn't do this well enough, I didn't, you know, whatever, all this doubt, and the child, that just overflows to the child, and there's a great amount of insecurity. There's, you know, just a lot of things that come out of this. So by having a very targeted resource that helps families overcome that, it is such a gift to families. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands how important this resource really is and how helpful it can be. Let's talk for a second about just those early days. What role do you believe that early childhood education really does play in setting a foundation, I guess, for the reading skills that our kids will have as they continue to grow and mature?
I love the way you asked that question, because I think one of the most important things to come out of those early years of reading is not maybe even success in the actual process of reading, but a formation of an attitude towards reading, and a defining how they view education and learning. We want them to absolutely be in love with the process of learning, because reading
Yes.
is just, in those early years, it's everything.
Yeah.
Later on, it is the tool to everything else. It's
It's the
the
key.
doorway.
Absolutely. It opens
Yes.
those doors.
Yes. And no place more importantly than the word of God itself. If
Hmm.
we do not instill in them the idea that reading is always for understanding, then we ask them to go to their Bible and read without context.
Yeah.
We put them in a scenario where they are consuming media, and they hear one little piece of information and it can destroy a worldview, because
Yeah.
they've not learned those skills of thinking and connecting dots. So reading is not just successfully being able to look at a sentence and say, okay, that says the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog, but well, how do we know the dog was lazy? Like, what in the world makes
Yeah.
you think that? What does lazy mean and everything? Without that understanding that reading is communication, and that it's nothing until you take it in, absorb it, and then make sense of it, then it pours back into writing, back into
Mm.
speaking, back into
Yeah.
communication. It's what you do with those things. Reading is just the first step. So I think,
Yeah.
if when they're young, in those early years, if we can make all of learning as inviting and fun as possible, and that can start in the toddler years where you're reading books. Oh, this is so
Right.
exciting! Look at this, and to constantly letting them stop and point things out on the page and interrupt the story and stop it if they're done. Ask them questions about it later. Hey, we saw in that book we read earlier, there was a duckling. Look, there's a duck on the pond. Isn't that exciting? Connecting. Make reading not about this one particular book, this one
Yeah.
particular word that they might be stuck on. Reading is so much more than that, because it is just a single part of communication. So if we can instill that in them in those early years, I think that's even more important than them being at level H when they're supposed to be at level H.
Right. Right. Well, and I so appreciate the way that you tied that into the love of learning, because we talk so much about wanting to give our kids a love of learning, and yet we don't necessarily tie that to the joy in learning to read, the
Mm,
joy in the doors that that unlocks, the joy in even in the process, because it's not always the most fun process to listen to a new reader read aloud to you. That can be a
right?
little laborious for someone listening in. But if we as parents can communicate even joy in those moments, joy in the successes, joy in the things that they're learning, that overflows to our kids in really powerful ways that sets them up for loving what they're going to learn as they continue to grow and unlock doors through what they read.
Right, right. I've been working with a fifth grader this summer who was reading realistically at a kindergarten level.
Hmm.
And I did everything I could in probably the first 3 weeks that we were together to not to well, we were working on things, we were working on skill development, but more so than that, I wanted him to enjoy coming to meet with me.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was dumb jokes. It was questions. What do you like? What do you not like? You don't like this? Okay, we're not doing that today. Because at that point, there's such a struggle around when kids
Yeah.
are having a hard time with reading. They know they're having a hard time with reading, and they struggle. You could see it weighing on them. Their heads are down. Sometimes you get with kids, and it can be as simple as constantly not being able to identify B and D the right way. And the head goes
Mm.
down on the desk and they're like, oh, the frustration is visible.
Yeah.
They're physical expressions of the frustration that they're feeling. And it can lead to anxiety. There's a neurophysiological basis behind
Wow.
that, not being able to process information being the basis behind anxiety. And if we can alleviate that,
Mm.
it's so much of the struggle of learning to read. If we
Yeah.
can help them understand that every person has things that are hard for them. Lots of things don't come easy in life. Reading might be one of those things for you. That's okay. It doesn't mean you're not going to get it. It doesn't
Yep.
mean that we're not making progress. Look what you can do now that you couldn't do 3 weeks ago. It's fantastic. That there's so much more around that than the success in a letter identification and fluency. That success will come faster and more permanently if first you could adjust their uh, their thinking around reading and about how
Yeah.
that makes them feel as a person.
Oh, absolutely. I talk in kind of when I'm sharing about the heart schooling paradigm, which is what we talk about so much at Teach Them Diligently, going for the hearts of your children. Academics always follows as you disciple and you teach your
Mhm.
children all these things. The academic level raises too. It's amazing how when you do things God's way, it works out really well, right? But in a heart schooling paradigm, I always encourage parents to adjust the benchmarks that they're going for, because so often we have an entirely different view of how we are trying to parent our children and educate our children, and yet we use the same benchmarks that a system that we left uses. And so it really goes very much in line with what you were talking about there. As you are celebrating the progress, as you are celebrating you really just those moments that you're able to have with your child, and the relationship and the confidence that you're able to instill by celebrating their successes rather
Mhm.
than
Mhm.
bemoaning the failures all the time and just feeling like you're falling behind and behind and behind. Those things can be massive wins for a heart schooling parent, and they can impact your child in really profound ways for a very long time.
Absolutely. I love that. That is eh, I mean, really, it comes back to Christ being our ultimate example to look to. He was the master teacher. As teachers of any subject, we have an example to look to and to follow. And if you look at the way he taught those who were around him, he utilized questions.
Mm.
And I have been studying Christ communication on earth for the last couple of years, and I make notes and I do workshops, and I talk about comprehension from the perspective of how Christ worked with people on earth, because he asked different types of questions.
Yeah.
There was no one standard way
Right.
that he brought people around him to realization. And in the end, the 12 people that he spent the most time with them, of those 12, not all of them got it.
Hmm.
And some of them got it later, but not then. And I think that just speaks to the fact that he knew that. He worked with each of them where they were and grew them, and then they continued to grow. And he did all of that through individual, unique learning plans for each person. And I think there's a lot to take away from that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Lydia, this has been so fun. We are out of time now. I definitely want to have you back on the podcast. There's so much more I want to dive into with you. So we'll make that happen really, really soon. But before we go, I want you to tell everyone where they can find out more about Reading HQ and how they can connect with you if they want to.
Oh, well, first of all, let me just say that the Reading HQ is not a silver bullet. It's not it I want everybody to know that I built this thing to help in what I do and to help other people. I am in no way putting it forward as the solution to any and all problems. And I am constantly getting feedback and making it better and more. So please
Mhm.
don't think that I'm saying, "Oh, this is it. This will fix all the problems."
It'll cure what ails you.
But I want it to be the best tool it can be. So you can find out more information at the website, which is www.thereadinghq.com. And then you can email me at lydia@thereadinghq.com. I'll be happy to sit and talk with you. I will be happy to show you how it works. If it works and you get into it, and moms are constantly in touch with me about how, hey, this thing, like this flashcard is missing, and where do I get that? So then I put on my tech hat and I go to the website and I go to the digital platform and upload something, or it'll break. That is all a part of what I do. So I'm doing the best I can to make something that helps other people. And so
Yeah.
if that fits in your journey, that's great. But I don't want you to feel like I'm trying to sell you something, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yes. But when you have a great resource that will help families in something as important as this, I want to make sure that we make it very easy for them to find it. So I will link all of, or I will put the links to Reading HQ in the show notes to make it very easy for you to hop over. Learn more, engage with Lydia. If this is something that you believe would be helpful for your family, I'm sure that she would be more than happy to help you start to use it well. So check the link in the show notes so that you can find out more about it. I'm eager to hear from some of you about how it does help in the days ahead, because I just in what I've learned in listening to Lydia share today, I'm so excited about getting this resource out to as many families as we can. So Lydia, thank you so much for spending time with us today. It has
Oh,
been a joy to hear you explain all of this.
I had a blast. Thank you so much for, like I said, I love talking about it. So anytime I'd love to come back and talk more.
Well, that sounds great. We will make sure we make that happen. So, everybody else, thank you guys for listening in. I am sure that you have learned a lot as I have. I am sure that you have rejoiced as I have at how God created each one of us uniquely. I'm sure that you have stood in awe that we as parents are able to give our children a love of learning, and it starts when they are so very, very young. And what a great privilege that is. So, I encourage you to check out the Reading HQ. Check the show notes for more information on that. And I look forward to talking to you again real soon.